Hello guys, this is Volfa or Volfa What, whichever one fits your preference. Now, I should apologize for the lack of content to say. I've kind of hit a bit of a content slump, and hopefully I can actually get back on track with the pacing and actually get back on track with doing what I do. So again, real apologies for that. We will hopefully continue more on the Tome Talk series. Hopefully I'll try to get some Into the Minds of out, and yeah, again, major sorries. I do feel bad about the whole content slump, but I've kind of just been in a just crappy mood, and though it's not a justification, I should at least apologize just for the lack of general content, because I do like putting out content there, and it's kind of a bit off for me to just to completely go dead for like months. Alright, how's it going, my Volfa Legion? Now, we're here to talk about David King and his Tome story, Manchester Mashup. Let's take a look to see how the asshole with a heart of gold manages to come out on top and prove that he's actually pretty much a decent person. And I've also got a little bit of interesting speculation on just entity pickings and that as well, so let's dive in. To start off, David is probably, if you guys haven't known, like this is just a bit of outside talk about the law, David is probably the most morally reprehensible out of the survivor cast we have. We have people who've made mistakes, people who have done like a bit of vandalism or off things, but David is the only one who has actively done reprehensible and really like shitty effed up things in his life. Which is kind of a curious note as to why he is a survivor instead of something like a killer or whatnot, when you also have people like Plague and Spirit who actually haven't killed. So you'd think David, with his shady past, would also line up with that because he hasn't killed, but he has the flair for it, if you would. But I think this story pretty much capitalizes on why he isn't a killer. The story of Manchester Mashup is essentially the origin story of how David got connected with his shady past. And it starts off realistically with him just being just a standard fighter. He does a lot of fights, gets a lot of money bet on him, pretty much your regular stuff. During this, we find out why he's such an effective fighter. It's basically because he visualizes his father's face, his abusive father's face on all the people he fights. A very standard method, him unleashing all his anger, his pent-up hatred for all the years of abuse he's seen go forward to his mother, and even some to probably him. Essentially, it comes to a boiling point where, during an altercation with his father and his mother, and he realizes his father's gonna hit his mother again, he basically steps in and beats the crap out of his father, getting cut off from his family and essentially being forced onto the streets. And we find out something interesting. David's friends, or supposed ones, only really hung out with him because of his money, because of what he had. Essentially, they hung out with him because he was rich. After finding out that he's been cut off, people abandon him, people don't want anything to do with him, he finds out that his friends aren't really his friends. When he has nothing left, he has nothing left. Even turning to an ex, who essentially calls him a shithead and doesn't want anything to do with him, he realizes he's alone. In the end, David realizes he has a friend. One solitary true friend. Someone who doesn't want him for money or for what he's got. Someone who sticks by him when King's at his lowest. This person, Donnie, essentially has a lot of debt riding on him. And eventually, after a fight and David realizes he's lost his edge, he ends up wondering what to do. Donnie's now even in a worse situation and eventually gets pulled down into a pub basement to get beaten up. And this is pretty much where we see King fight for what he truly wants to fight for. His friends, people who genuinely care about him, the people who are close to him. He goes up and literally beats the crap out of the people, and instead of the mob boss going at him and even getting David killed, he gives him an offer. Work for me as a debt collector and doing other illicit jobs, and your friend's debt is completely cleared. And of course, King being a person we know, as we know with the perk, we're gonna live forever. If it's anything to do to protect those who are close to him, those who he actually considers friends, now that he's had his wake-up call and realized the people around him who just want him for his money are not friends, he of course goes ahead with it. As the last line says, always bet on King. So, the question I posed in the beginning, what separates David King from someone like the Spirit of a Plague, people who have never necessarily hurt somebody, or let me rephrase that, never necessarily killed a person, because Plague hasn't killed, Spirit hasn't killed, but they became killers. And David, who has beaten people up, who has had like massive anger spurts and has done brutal things, almost popping a guy's eye out, probably would fit the definition of a killer, yet he's not. And I think it's the fundamental fact that his reasons for fighting have always been, let's say, pure. His determination and the fact that he fights for, again, the people who have wronged those he cares about. He fights for his friends, he fights for that, and that's what gives him strength. He'll even put himself at harm's risk if it means his friends are safe. Essentially, like with Donnie, he'll essentially put himself at risk and even do stuff that he'll consider bad to be something that he'll fight for. In another archives, we also find out a very interesting fact. David, despite being brutal, despite beating the crap out of people, would never actually kill a person or would never actually do it. A lot of his stuff is either just beating or threats. We find out with one person that he essentially threatened to burn them alive, getting a gasoline canister and essentially pouring it over them and lighting a match, only to figure out that it wasn't gasoline but water. A threat in a way, but not an actual execution of violence. That's kind of just how King rolls. He'd beat the crap out of you, maybe threaten your life a bit, but he wouldn't actually put into action any violence that would go beyond that. David really is the definition of the phrase, you're a bad guy, but you're not a bad guy. Essentially, he'll fight for the people he cares about, he'll fight for the people he genuinely has a connection with. He's a douchebag, he's an asshole, as he said, his ex calls him a shithead. Honestly, he's beats people up for fun, he is probably like a right douche. But when he has those people who he genuinely considers close, people who aren't just false friends or fake with him, people who are genuinely close with him, who are genuinely friends and he genuinely cares about, he'll put himself in danger, he'll put himself in compromising situations just to see that these people don't get hurt. And that's how he reacts in the fog. He might have grown attached to the survivors that we play against, might have grown attached to people like Fung, to Nia, to Dwight, to Ace. And it means that if he needs to, he'll put himself at risk, even put himself on the line of death to keep them safe. Which just shows how much of an amazing person he is and shows why he really isn't the type of person to be manipulated into the entity's favor for being a killer. However, what he does do, and this is something very devious on the entity's part, is he gives people hope. A person who will put themselves on the line to protect you, put themselves in harm's way just to make sure you're safe, will give that person hope. For example, if David were to go and save a Fung from almost dying, and then take the brunt of the attack himself, that gives Fung a hope that she could survive, it gives Dwight a hope that he could survive. David is legitimately a beacon of hope. Maybe not like Kate or Jane or someone who is inspirational, but someone who you know you could rely on, someone who you know can protect you. And that could give you more hope than you can imagine. David King really is an asset to the survivors and the entity. Alright, so how does Manchester Mashup stand up? Like with Claudette, Claudette's story, this is probably one of the stories that I like the most. It tackles it in a different way than Claudette does. Claudette is more of a understanding in a slower, more methodical way, whilst David is a bit more of a nuance into why he's done his dark past, but it also explains why his character the way he is. Claudette explained why she's shy, why she's empathetic. David explained why he cares about people and why he used to do all those shitty things that he did. It definitely is what I'd call a more striking and engaging story than, say, Jane was. I would definitely rank this up in one of the top favorite, at least for survivors with me. For how it explores the character and adds to the character, I'll definitely give that a 7. It really expands on just who David is, why he does what he does in the fog, and why he does what he does outside of it. And just explains away why he got into the situation that might seem like the illicit past that you might think, wait, why isn't this guy a killer, when some killers who have done less shitty things than him are killers. It also references a decent theme of just knowing who your true friends are, knowing who you want to protect. The people who are around you just because you have money or a talent or something that they could benefit from aren't really your friends. But the people who will stick by you, even when you have nothing, when you're absolutely alone, the people who will still stand with you, that is friendship. So essentially, for the themes it gives, I'll definitely give that about an 8. And overall, the story definitely hits in the high brackets for me. I'd probably say about a 8.5 out of 10 if I'd have to rank it up in general. Definitely probably one of the best when it comes to survivor stories. So that has been our explanation to David King and the Manchester mashup story. I'll see you, my Volfa Legion. In the comment sections, discuss what you think and tell me your opinions on David and what you think about him.